burst dams, power cuts and streets and neighbourhoods submerged. From Austria to Romania, exceptionally heavy rainfall sparked by Storm Boris has been pounding swathes of Central Europe. A low-pressure system crossing the region has unleashed record-high rains, leading to the deaths of at least 17 people. In Poland, authorities in several cities, including the capital Warsaw, are calling for food donations for survivors of the floods. Some €300 million in relief funding has been pledged, meanwhile, by the Austrian government to deal with the catastrophe. With the latest, here's Matthew Mary-Carriche.
Residents of the Czech Republic have been working to assess the damage caused by floods devastating Central Europe. Most of the country has been affected by floods, but the situation has been worst in two northeastern regions where authorities declared a state of emergency. A number of towns and cities were submerged on Sunday, with thousands of people evacuated. On Monday, waters began to recede, leaving behind destroyed bridges and damaged roads.
These floods are definitely worse than those of 1997. 2 meters of water ran through the street, and there was a whirlpool that damaged the house. Now it may need to be taken down. There have been many ruined cars floating down the street. It's terrible. People will have a lot of work to do.
As torrential rain from Storm Boris continues to pound Central Europe with record rainfall, rivers have been bursting their banks, also devastating Austria, Poland, and Romania. Climatologist Christophe Caroux told France 24 that climate change is having a complex effect on how often storms such as this will occur.
Le premier ingrédient, c'est-à-dire que cette descente d'air froid.
The first ingredient for a storm is the descent of cold air, which is much less likely in a changing climate. Thus, the formation of storms as intense as this is also much less likely. But conversely, when such a storm does form, its impact in terms of precipitation will be much stronger. This is because climate change means that there is an increase in the amount of water contained in the atmosphere that must come down somewhere.
Il va ensuite se déverser à un endroit donné.
A low-pressure, high-humidity area continues to feed Storm Boris, which might have Slovakia and Hungary next in its sights.
Well, experts say climate change caused by greenhouse gas emissions generated by human activity is increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events such as torrential rains and flooding. Campaigning network Greenpeace has responded to the floods in Central Europe by calling for an end to European support for fossil fuels. It's also demanding that climate polluters pay for such disasters. Well, to discuss, we're joined now by Ian Duff. He is head of Greenpeace International's Stop Drilling, Start Paying campaign. Ian, good to have you with us on the programme this evening. Greenpeace, you're saying that you are concerned that disasters like this will only get worse until oil and gas giants stop drilling for fossil fuels that are driving climate change. What exactly needs to happen according to Greenpeace?
Yes, well, first, thank you very much for having me on. And let me start by saying that Greenpeace is truly horrified by the damages brought by these floods. And we stand in solidarity, too, with the survivors and the families of the victims. But also we applaud the courage of the first responders, the firefighters, the medical staff who are out there now saving people and helping them get their lives back. And what we'd love to see now is European leaders match that courage by boldly facing this crisis. And what that means is pretty simple. We need a plan to get off oil and gas as quickly as possible. That's what we need in order to make sure that these sorts of floods are not going to be getting worse and worse with each year.
You say it's simple, Ian, but are European leaders actually ready to listen to those calls?
I think they need to listen to the experiences that we're seeing play out almost every week now. We're seeing them right now in Eastern Europe. They're absolutely horrific, but this is not unusual. This is not unique now. We're seeing this every week, and it's not just Europe. Right now in Western Africa, for instance, 1,000 people have died there from flooding. So our leaders need to listen to the experiences that they're seeing play out, that real people are experiencing, And a lot of people right now are going to be saying, how do I pay for this? Who helps me? And what we're saying is it needs to be the big oil and gas companies that have created this problem. They're the ones that should pay for it.
How do you get them to pay, though? How would such a system work? Presumably there would be significant pushback from those oil companies, from those gas companies. So how would such a policy work in practice?
Well, first of all, we need to be really clear about why they're responsible. And the first thing to say there is that the oil and gas companies have known for decades that they're causing the climate crisis, and that they've covered it up and they've delayed solutions in order to keep extracting and selling polluting fuels that experts say we cannot afford to burn. So that's why they deserve to be held to account, and why we need to start to make them pay. Now, how do we do that? Well, the second thing to say is that they've got the money. It's not like they can't afford it. On average, the industry has made $2.8 billion a day for the past 50 years. They've made trillions out of heating up our home planet, and it's only fair that they pick up the bill. So we're calling on leaders now to introduce a climate damages tax, and that would apply a tax to those companies, and we would use that money to pay for the damages that people right now are facing.
But I guess those oil companies, those gas companies would argue that there are very many factors at play when it comes to disasters like the one that's playing out in Central Europe currently. So how much of that blame can be laid at the hands of the gas and oil industry?
Well, that's a really interesting question. And what we're actually seeing at the moment in the US is the rise of a lot of lawsuits now being brought by major US cities against oil and gas industries. And what those lawsuits are arguing is that because the oil and gas companies knew, because they acted to cover that up, or to hide, or to deny, or to delay, they can be held accountable for that. And so we're watching very closely right now at those lawsuits to see whether how those courts will rule. And we very much hope that those judges will rule that oil and gas should be forced to pay for climate damages.
And as we've seen what's been happening in Central Europe over the last few days, climate scientists, they're saying that the extent of this flooding, the kind of flooding that we've been seeing in various countries across Central Europe, that really shows how ill prepared we are for dealing with disasters such as this. So what exactly should governments be doing in terms of preparing? Do we need to see more, early warning systems, more resilient infrastructure? I suppose it depending on which country you're speaking about, but generally speaking, what exactly do governments need to do to be preparing us for the future?
You're absolutely right. Governments need to be preparing us for the future, and for each country that will be slightly different. But we can see that the scale of the challenge is massive, and that it is hitting rich countries and poor countries alike. And so governments need really strong plans in place. But they can only do that if they've got the money. And governments more and more are struggling with the public purse. So we say that's why you go and get the money from the oil and gas industry. They're the ones who have made trillions out of generating the climate crisis. It's only fair that the polluters pick up the bill, not the people who are already, really facing a cost of living crisis or other difficulties.
And Ian, what though can individual communities do? Can individuals actually do on a personal level?
I mean, obviously, we all need to get better and clearer about what we need to do when extreme weather events hit in our regions. But that isn't going to address the problem at a larger scale. The only way we can address that problem at a larger scale is by pressuring our elected leaders to not only be campaigning in their parties to end oil and gas expansion, but also to come in with this policy to make the oil and gas companies like Shell, like Total, like OMV pay for the climate damages that they're responsible for.
And as you say as well, this isn't obviously a problem here in Europe. We're not even the worst affected by disasters like this. You've pointed to the situation in Southeast Asia, Latin America, various parts of Africa as well. So just tell us how the fossil fuel industry is worsening extremes, not just here in Europe, but elsewhere.
Well, it's exactly the same process. When oil and gas is burnt, is producing emissions, and those emissions, it doesn't matter where they're produced, they're having the same effect. And as we look around the world, there are many countries where, like you say, they are facing extreme weather events as well. And a lot of those countries are actually find it even harder to deal with the response. A lot of those countries, they don't have insurance, they don't have home insurance. So how do they pay for it? And that's why it's so crucial that rich governments are also supporting other governments around the world to deal with extreme weather events when they strike there as well.
Ian, we'll have to leave it there for now, but thank you so much for your time on the programme this evening. That's Ian Duff, Head of Greenpeace International Stop Drilling, Start Paying campaign. Thank you. Well, that's it from us for now. Stay with us, though.